Ellen White and the Publishing Vision. The birth of Adventist printing. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that your faith is real, truly real, but no matter how much you try to share it, no one really listens? Something like this. You try to talk about something that transformed your life. You speak to friends, family, church members, but it feels like your words simply don't reach far enough. Sometimes, it's as if your faith is trapped inside your own mind, as if you carried a message that is huge, precious, alive, but so few people seem able to hear it. And here's the thing. If you've ever felt that, then you're experiencing the very same thing a small group of believers lived through in 1848. And more importantly, you're feeling exactly what led Ellen White to receive one of the most revolutionary visions in the history of Christian faith. The vision that literally founded a worldwide publishing movement at a time when those believers barely had food to eat. Today, I'm going to show you how a simple vision of streams of light circling the world became the beginning of the largest Protestant editorial work of the 19th century. And the most fascinating part? This story reveals exactly why your faith sometimes feels small, and what you can do to expand it far beyond the sound of your voice. My name is Nick, and I spend far too much time thinking about how people of faith deal with moments of complete impossibility, when God asks for something enormous, but you have absolutely nothing in your hands. And if you're someone who has ever felt that God called you to something bigger than your resources, bigger than your strength, bigger than your logic, then hit that subscribe button, drop a like, because this video, I promise you, is going to speak to you. The truth is that we romanticize spiritual history far too much. But real life, real faith, almost always begins in scarcity, not abundance. And in 1848, Ellen and James White were living the most extreme version of that. Imagine this. You and your spouse are dedicated to preaching the gospel. There is no organized church, no building, no salary, no institutional support, no possessions, no guaranteed food. You travel from farm to farm, from barn to barn, depending entirely on the kindness of strangers, tired, in debt, cold, and still trying to keep alive a faith the whole world said had already died. Now think about it. How does anyone keep faith alive in a situation like that? Most people wouldn't. But this is where the deeper spiritual psychology comes in. When all external resources run out, the human mind, willing or not, is forced to look inward. And it is precisely at that point of vulnerability that true faith is born. Ellen was there, exhausted, fragile in health, preaching without rest, watching her husband nearly collapse from exhaustion. And yet, the work still needed to continue. Now you may be thinking, Nick, it's impossible to do something big when you have nothing. But here's what most people don't realize. It's precisely when you have nothing that God can begin everything. It was the summer of 1848, Rocky Hill, Connecticut. After a long day of meetings, exhausted and with nothing else to offer, Ellen and a small group gathered to pray. A simple prayer. No music, no instruments, no structure. Just tired voices asking for direction. And here's where things get really interesting. Many times when we reach the end of our abilities, God begins to reveal His. In the middle of that prayer, Ellen was taken into vision. And what she saw, no one in that room was prepared for. She described it. I saw streams of light encircling the world. Streams. Not drops. Not flashes. Streams, meaning a continuous, immense, unstoppable flow of divine light reaching every corner of the earth. And how did that light spread? Through the printed work. Books, pamphlets, written words, pages carrying messages to people Ellen would never meet in person. Now I want you to put yourself in her place. You have no money, no belongings, no physical strength, no structure. And God shows you something so enormous it seems absolutely impossible. Spiritual psychology teaches that when the human brain encounters the impossible, it activates two modes. Survival mode. I can't do this. It's too big. Or mission mode. If it's impossible for me, then that's exactly why it must come from God. And Ellen stepped into mission mode. When the vision ended, she told everything to her husband. And James stayed silent. Let's be honest, Ellen had enormous faith, but James was dealing with the practical side of reality. They barely had money to keep traveling. They ate what they could find. They were in debt. And God was asking them to start a publishing work? It was like God asking you today to start a global printing ministry when you don't even have money to put gas in your car. And here's another psychological truth about faith. Men of faith don't always receive a divine vision with enthusiasm. Sometimes they receive it with fear. But Ellen, with that calm firmness that only comes from divine conviction, said, "The work must begin. God will open the way." And James, even afraid, chose to believe. Here's something most people don't realize. Faith is never born complete. It begins small. The difference is that some choose to water it, others don't. James chose to water it. He began writing small pamphlets. Picture this: a simple piece of paper. Handwritten messages. Nothing professional. Nothing big. But full of purpose. And then, by faith, he secured a small loan to print the very first publication. The Present Truth. 16 pages. Very few copies. He wrapped each copy by hand. He took them to the post office himself. He paid every postage fee with borrowed money. And Ellen? She prayed. She encouraged. She said, "Don't look at what's missing. Look at what God has promised." And this is one of the most powerful lines you can apply to your own spiritual journey. Think about it. How many times have you failed to do something because you focused on what was lacking? How many times did you give up before even trying, simply because logic told you it wouldn't work? And now you may be thinking, "Nick, I'm not like Ellen. I don't have visions, I don't have a prophetic calling, I'm not certain of anything." Yes, exactly. And that's what makes faith so powerful. You don't need certainty. Faith grows in the middle of uncertainty. Faith is not proof. Faith is a step. The first publications were sent out. And almost immediately letters came back. People moved to tears. Faith awakening again. Isolated believers saying, "Please send more. We need this light." Ellen and James began working day and night, literally, collecting letters, writing replies, editing texts, folding pages, preparing new printings. They had so little money that, during some periods, they lived only on boiled potatoes. And when there was no paper or money for postage, Ellen sold personal belongings. That is faith in action. It's not glamorous. It's not pretty. It's sacrificial. Here's what most people don't realize. True faith will cost you something. Always. There is no cheap faith. There is no purpose without price. But there is something far greater. Eternal fruit born from small sacrifices. Year after year, edition after edition, what began as a 16-page pamphlet became magazines, books, manuals, periodicals, international publications, and later, one of the largest Christian publishing works in the world. All beginning in a borrowed room, with money that didn't exist, with fragile health, with weak harvests, with scarce resources, with nights in prayer, with physical labor, with unshakable faith. And here's the revelation that really matters. What was impossible in 1848 became inevitable in 1870. When God promises, time doesn't delay, time prepares. Now let's talk seriously. When you look at Ellen's faith story, you might think, "It was God. That won't happen with me." But I need to show you something deep about spiritual psychology. Every person who receives a calling goes through 3 phases. 1. The signal. Something stirs your heart. Something catches your attention. It's subtle but real. 2. The resistance. Logic says, "It's not possible." The mind says, "I can't do this." Fear says, "What if I fail?" 3. The action. The moment you act, even without having everything ready. Even without seeing the result. Even without understanding the whole vision. And here's the secret. Faith only grows in phase 3. Never in phase 1. Never in phase 2. Spiritually mature people are not the ones who understand more. They are the ones who act more. Decades later, Ellen said, "From that small beginning came a stream of light that went around the world." And today, it truly does. Books, schools, universities, hospitals, mission work, pages that changed lives she never met. Here's the really interesting part. The vision was not about paper. It wasn't about ink. It wasn't about printing presses. It was about people who would never be reached in any other way. And the question I leave for you is, what is your pamphlet? What small beginning are you ignoring? What vision have you received and still think is too impossible to begin? The publishing work began with a vision and a small leaflet. Your work may begin with a conversation, a text, a video, a prayer, a tiny act, anything God places in your hand. If this story spoke to you, I want to invite you to something very simple. Stop today looking at what's missing and start looking at what God has promised. If you felt something inside, if this message lit a spark, if you want to deepen your faith, understand your calling, and begin to act, then subscribe to the channel now, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this. Because just like in 1848, maybe the light God wants to send into the world is beginning right here, with you. And with one small step,